Hello, I'm Suzanne Atwell, and welcome to a special edition of the Suzanne Atwell Show. 2020, the year in review. It has been a long 12 months, one we will always remember but would like to forget. As we look back at the stories we covered, the themes that emerge are familiar. They literally define the community in which we live. Little did we know when we began 2020 with the 50th anniversary of the Van Wezel, that by the end of the year, our great arts organizations would be fighting to reinvent themselves in a COVID world. But that is exactly what happened. Ground was broken on April 25th, 1968. It was designed by William Wesley Peters, a protege and son-in-law of the world-famous architect Frank Lloyd Wright. A serrated, lavender-colored seashell found by Mrs. Frank Lloyd Wright is the inspiration for the shape and color of the hall. The shell is on display in the lobby. The hall opened on January 5th, 1970, with a sold-out production of Fiddler on the Roof.
Well, Sarasota has been built on the arts as a community. And you know, a lot of that goes back historically, obviously, to John Ringling and the circus, and then all of the visual artists that came here and the literary artists that came here. But really about the end of the 40s, early 50s, when Historic Oslo Theater was produced and then put Sarasota on the map from a performing arts point of view. Even though it came through the Ringling Museum, it became the home of the Sarasota Opera at that time. But then just a short 10 years later, the Van Wezel Performing Arts Hall came here. And it was a whole different perspective for our community. The great thing that it brought was traveling shows, Broadway shows, star power of great performers. You know, we love our theater here. We love our opera. We love our ballet. We love the fact that we have creatively produced arts here. But what the Van Wezel has added to that is the addition of great performances from the outside, things that people want to see. And to me, the greatest thing about that has been that so many of the people that love the traditional arts, whether it's theater or opera or ballet, love that. But then there are lots and lots of people in the community who like that, but they want to see Tony Bennett. They want to see a star of some sort. They want to see a traveling Broadway musical. And the Van Wezel has brought that addition to the performing arts here. You know, they bring a different perspective, but most of all, what they brought was this iconic view on the bay, this purple building that states out loud, we are a community that believes in the value of arts and culture.
That interview with Jim was done in February. By the end of March, theaters were going dark. By November, when we did a show on COVID and local performing arts, everything was on the line.
I think we have ways of moving forward now collectively to make a much bigger impression, to tell the story that this is a genuine arts community that people need to be proud of and aware of and see how it connects to the economic vitality of the whole city. The economic vitality, the social capital, everything that makes this as an attractive place to live and educate your kids, the arts are a fundamental part of that.
A 2017 survey of nonprofit arts and culture in Sarasota County found a direct economic impact of nearly $300 million a year. Nearly 7,500 full-time equivalent jobs created, and over 12 million in local taxes.
As you know, the arts were the first to close because we need people to be in a room together. So we were the first industry to close down, and it looks like we're going to be the last to fully come back. So that, if you actually look at the numbers on that, we have the greatest number of financial stress for the greatest number of people in any single industry. And that's nationwide, that's worldwide actually. When you look at the London theatre, the theatre world around the world has stopped. And everybody working in those industries is out of work.
Tell me how your your performers are faring? What concerns do they have? Have they voiced them?
When COVID-19 came down and we actually had to shut down rehearsals and we had to take a show off the stage that had just gone into his third week of a run, it was depression. And there was a real big slump emotionally and mentally for our artists. There has been life revived now that they feel there is some work for some of them. I mean, I've had calls from all over the nation, artist friends of mine, many of them that I mentor. So there's a lot more communication between the arts organization, asking each other, how are you getting through with this?
Sure.
How did you deal with this? How did you deal with that? With your staffing, with the production world. Now that we have gone into the parking lot, a lot of theaters are calling us now. You know, how is it working? Are the people coming out? We're thinking about doing something similar. And so mostly every local theater now is thinking about doing outdoor something because that is what people are feeling comfortable participating in.
COVID's impact on society has been pervasive, nowhere more profoundly than healthcare. In February, we reported on emerging local trends and demographics. 9 months later, we're looking at infection rates and respirators. Sarasota County, like the rest of Florida, is experiencing dramatic population growth. In 2018, Sarasota County had a population of nearly 427,000. Our demographic profile skews older. Nearly 37% of the county is 65 or older. Countywide, 90% of us have health insurance, 31% have private employee plans, and 37% have Medicaid or Medicare. Not surprisingly, healthcare is a leading economic driver for the region. 3 of the 5 largest employers in the county are hospitals. And the #1 largest employer in the county, Sarasota Memorial Hospital. Employees, 6,550 people. Advanced technology and world-renowned specialists are available in almost every sector. Orthopedic needs for the 60-plus demographic are significant, including procedures like arthroscopic surgery. Comprehensive cardiovascular care is also growing. The cardiac team at Sarasota Memorial performs more than 1,000 cardiovascular surgeries and 6,000 procedures each year. So as CEO of a major public hospital in a city that is growing rapidly, so where is the care going? And you talked a little bit about it, but what do we have to look forward to in the future? Because this isn't going to stop, this aging population and people moving here. Look at downtown, look at the real estate. These are fairly affluent people coming here that demand good health care.
So patients come here really from all over the country now for services at Sarasota Memorial, but they certainly come from up in Hillsborough, Pinellas, all the surrounding counties, and we have to figure out how to make sure we deliver care for everyone who needs it in this region and anyone who wants to come here. So we have started a hospital in Venice. We're opening a new hospital in 2021 in Venice. We keep building facilities off of this campus. We're trying to get healthcare closer to people's homes in a more affordable way and without sacrificing quality, in fact, increasing the quality every time we do it. So I think you're going to continue to see more outreach projects like Venice, like possible other urgent cares, maybe in Northport. It's probably things further south. We have a number of things coming on in the Lakewood Ranch University area right now. And then, of course, this main campus, we keep revitalizing it all the time.
By August, a virus we had never even heard of when the year began had changed the world. And to make matters worse, politics, not science, was defining the nation's survival strategy.
This is not really a political thing. This is a matter really of life and death. You know, we're dealing here with a virus, right, that has a genome size of around 20,000 base pairs. It has no brain. okay? It doesn't care whether you're a Republican or a Democrat or what race you are. It is just an implacable killer. You can't bully it away, you can't talk it away. It's just there, and it's going to take advantage of any openings that we give it.
COVID-19 is a member of the large family of viruses ranging from the common cold to severe diseases like Middle East Respiratory Syndrome, or MERS, and severe acute respiratory syndrome, SARS. Coronaviruses are transmitted between animals and people.
We tend to analyze these things, and the courts tend to analyze them under this framework. Individual liberties can be restrained if the government has a compelling interest. So, is a pandemic a compelling governmental interest to protect public health? Absolutely. There's no question about that. Courts have ruled that way many times in the past, although we fortunately don't have a whole lot of law on this topic. But when there has been pandemics and public health threats, courts have said that's a compelling governmental interest that can be protected. The second part of the equation is when the government does act, they must do so in the least intrusive means possible and narrowly tailor the objective to the governmental interest that's being protected. So let's just give some examples. 10 or more, crowds of 10 or more gathering, CDC guidelines. Is that a legitimate governmental interest that is can be challenged in court? Yes, it can be challenged, but overwhelmingly, courts have said, yes, those restrictions can be placed in a public health crisis. Wearing of mask, yes, it can be compelled to quarantines. If individuals are infected, they can be confined to their home. And if they leave their home, they can be confined somewhere else. You don't have a right to infect someone else. You have a right to protest, you have a right to conduct yourselves accordingly, but the government can impose restraints when there is a legitimate and compelling governmental interest.
Sadly, that did not happen. We never caught up. The virus had won. Respirator shortages, ICU capacity, infectious disease wings, so many demands that we have. If you were putting together a 2021 capital budget for a large public hospital, what would your new priorities be?
I think the ability to handle public health pandemics. It's something we've been warned about for decades, by futurists and strategists and public health experts. We never thought anything like the plague or cholera or tuberculosis or some of those historical diseases that we've read about and feared. We never thought that with modern day medicine that could ever be facing us again. Well, now we know that not only will we be facing it again, but we'll probably be facing something new. And so the ability to be flexible and adaptable, I think, is probably number one, as we've seen with the hospitals converting wings to areas that can treat the COVID patients. As we see in the community, the ability to set up isolation facilities so that people can leave an intensive care unit and be cared for sort of in a step-down fashion on the way back to assisted living or wherever they came from. So I think we see the absolute need for adaptability and flexibility.
That was the story as summer came to an end. While COVID raged out of control, another crisis emerged. In September, we looked at police violence and racism, starting right here in Florida. 17-year-old Trayvon Martin was shot and killed while he was walking home in a gated townhouse community north of Orlando. The shooter, George Zimmerman, was charged with murder. On July 13th, in a Seminole County courtroom, Zimmerman was acquitted, claiming self-defense under Florida's Stand Your Ground law.
We want justice!
Protests erupted coast to coast. For the first time, the hashtag Black Lives Matter appeared on social media. In 2014, a New York City cop murdered Eric Garner with a chokehold. The officer was acquitted.
Put your hand behind your back. I can't breathe. I can't breathe. I can't breathe. I can't breathe. I can't breathe.
The murder of George Floyd was a tipping point.
Mama.
Get up and get in the car right.
I can't.
I think, number one, we need to certainly look at the Law Enforcement Bill of Rights. We need to look at how difficult it is to actually go after these bad officers. Not everybody, but we certainly want to be able to go after those who have repeated citations and repeated citations for excessive force. It's darn near impossible to really go after someone and get them off the force. And we really need to make sure we have a statewide database so that an officer who's had discipline in one jurisdiction can't go to another jurisdiction and they not know about it. We have to do a better job with regard to weeding out the bad officers. And also, I think we really need to have a discussion about the reallocation of funds. I know some people call it defunding the police. I do not. I call it the reallocation of funds. But really, we've got to start thinking outside the box. How do we get at the root cause of crime? We can, have more and more and more and more and more and more police, or we can start trying to reduce crime and reduce the crime that's associated with poverty, reduce the crime that is associated with police officers getting called rather than social workers.
This past August, the family of a 63-year-old grandmother, Adrienne Stevenson, who suffered from dementia, was fatally shot by a Sarasota County Sheriff's deputy. When they unsuccessfully tried to taser her, she was fatally shot. Her family is overwhelmed with grief. They recognize their mother had mental issues, but felt she did not need to be shot and killed.
We are at a point in society where we need more mental health, is that you can't use the police to do everything all the time for every purpose, and that the mental health, the safety and security of these people who are in distress and need help need something more than a cop. And I don't think it's about defunding police anymore. I think it's about the evolution of law enforcement and the evolution of our society, is that we have to go back to remember what Sir Robert Peel created law enforcement for, was the intermediary of policing in the communities and not using the military. And so we have to be open-minded as governments and law enforcement of adding social services within law enforcement. Right now we have 5 caseworkers inside the Sarasota County Sheriff's Office that we didn't have 11.5 years ago when I took over, that deal with homelessness, they deal with people leaving our jail, and I think that we're coming to a point now where we need caseworkers available to go out with law enforcement on substance abuse and mental health issues. The Sarasota County Sheriff's Office, we Baker Acted over 6,300 people over the last 5 years. Last year alone, we Baker Acted 1,300 people. So that's good when it works out well and we can triage it and get people into counseling. But at the end of the day, that's really not the role of law enforcement.
It's such a complicated issue. In my mind, I think that the first place I would start if I was chief of police, and I don't know anything about policing, so I think that more diversity training needs to happen. I think that we come with this baggage. I think many officers, I think we all do to some degree. If you live in this country, you come with some baggage with how you see people, and it affects your decision making, how you treat them, how you talk to them. And I think we got to be willing to acknowledge that. I don't think all Americans are racist, but I think we all have some level of prejudice.
Tom Knight retired as sheriff this year. He is now CEO of First Step Sarasota, a prominent mental health and addiction treatment center. The top environment story of 2020 is a commercial fish farm off the coast of Sarasota in the Gulf of Mexico. Conservationists are alarmed, investors claim it's safe, government regulators in the courts will likely have the final word. Kampachi Farms, LLC, a Hawaii-based aquaculture company, is the applicant. An EPA permit would, quote, authorize the discharge of pollutants from an aquatic animal production facility, end quote. Called the Valela Project, the beta test was done in Hawaii. The fish were caged in a futuristic-looking aquapod that drifted in currents between 3 and 70 miles offshore from the Big Island. The Valela Gamma test used the same net pen, but included a single-point mooring 6,000 feet deep and 6 nautical miles off the Kona coast. Valela Epsilon is the name of the Gulf of Mexico project. Unlike the drifting pen used in Hawaii, the Gulf pen will be fixed 40 nautical miles offshore, southwest of Sarasota. The single net pen is about 56 feet in diameter and 23 feet high. It would be anchored at a depth of 130 to 135 feet. At an EPA hearing held at Moat in January, environmental groups protested and expressed concerns about the impact on red tide.
Red tide, while it can be a naturally occurring event, is fed on different sorts of influx of nutrients. And so as fish waste and excess feed and all of this flow through the pen because it's not a closed structure, certainly it could increase or lengthen the red tide events that we've been seeing here.
If approved, 20,000 Almaco jack will be raised here each year. In the wild, they're considered a junk fish, but when raised in captivity, their body fat increases and they are sold as sashimi quality fish.
That particular fish is a very common fish. We find it in reefs all the way out to 180 feet of water. It migrates so that you may have a school in 80 feet of water that you can consistently catch fish on, and then it's gone. Where does it go? I don't know. They appear in 30 feet of water. Then they're in 160 feet of water. So they move around a lot, which is a problem because if a fish is sick or a school of fish is sick, they move around, they spread the disease through a very large portion of the Gulf of Mexico, north and south, east and west, into different fisheries. So if we're going to permit a process that concentrates these fish together, and they happen to get a parasite infection or another kind of infection which might need to be treated with an antibiotic, how do we quarantine these sick fish? How do we keep them where they are? Yes, they're in a cage, but what about the fish that swim into the cage, get the parasite, and leave, and infect other places?
States control the waters up to 3 miles offshore the U.S. coast, between 3 and 200 miles out. It's under federal jurisdiction. Attempts to introduce aquaculture in the U.S. federal waters have been thwarted by activist concerns about the impact on ocean ecosystems and wild fisheries.
The EPA has been tasked to look at this particular discharge from this particular site, and they've decided not to look beyond that. They've decided to do a very limited review and environmental assessment instead of a full environmental impact study, which might go broader beyond this particular project. But they've decided not to, and we'll likely challenge that. But there's no one else out there looking at this in a bigger scale, a bigger perspective. There used to be, the way that the regulatory regime was envisioned was that the NOAA, National Oceanographic Atmospheric Administration, was tasked to address the regulatory structure for these types of projects. The problem is, at the same time, or not at the same time, but I think afterwards, Congress tasked them with promoting offshore finfish aquaculture. So there was an inherent conflict in being tasked with regulating and promoting an industry at the same time, and that was challenged by a number of groups successfully in federal court in 2018, and that is on appeal. Right now there's a vacuum because the court said, Noah, you shouldn't be regulating this while promoting it. So there's no one out there taking a look at the bigger picture, and it's basically been delegated to EPA to look at this individual NPDES permit, and then also they'll require a permit from the Army Corps of Engineers to build their anchor system, which is also a minimal impact situation.
The Army Corps of Engineers ended its comment period recently. A final decision is expected soon, so stay tuned. And finally, we end our year in review with a story that is uniquely Sarasota. It's about patriotism, art, victims' rights, and tourism. Unconditional surrender, also known as the kissing statue. Times Square, New York City, tens of thousands flood the streets. In the middle of it all, 3 unsuspecting strangers about to make history. Alfred Eisenstadt captured the cover photo for Life magazine. George Mendoza, a jubilant, intoxicated sailor, on leave and scheduled to return to combat. And Greta Zimmer, a local gal who left work early and memorialized forever by Eisenstadt simply because the white uniform she wore made her look like a nurse.
I didn't know any of this history when I moved to Sarasota. I walked under a sculpture that hadn't been here before, and it was a sculpture. I can't say I paid much attention to it. But I do some volunteer work, and I worked with a young person who had been sexually assaulted, and she refused to walk anywhere near that statue because she said he was hurting her.
I think it's all about the context. And, you know, today's young people are very intelligent.
Yeah.
They're very worldly. They're not anything like you and I were when we were growing up, you know, kind of not aware of our surroundings and that type of thing. So, you know, you explain the euphoria of the moment. You balance that with the fact that taken out of context, this would probably be an inappropriate act because it was an unwelcomed, unrequested kiss. And if you went down the street or you went to the beach and you ran down the beach and you saw someone and you grabbed them and kissed them, you'd probably end up in jail. But this was the euphoria of the moment, that the biggest challenge our country has ever faced, prevailing in World War II. This represents that victory, that moment in time when our country came out of the war. And it's a moment that people who were alive back then, they still recall today how they felt, the thrill that went through their body to know that the war was over.
So the country may be coming apart at the seams, but the city has stayed true to itself. The statue will stay on the bay. As we look back at 2020, plagued by a pandemic, but life-saving vaccines on the way, divided by populist fear-mongering, but a new president-elect, systemic racial unrest, but an evolving willingness to reform. There is hope on the horizon. But frankly, 2021 can't come too soon as far as I'm concerned. Thanks for watching this year. We hope you learned something and enjoyed the show. You can watch this episode and all our previous shows on my website, Facebook, and YouTube pages. And until next year, I'm Suzanne Atwell, and we'll see you around town.